and it's a book about a Mexican American hero, Gregorio Cortez, who gets caught up in a shootout with some sheriffs, and Paredes does a really nice job. He kind of turns the history of Texas upside down a little bit, because the Texas Rangers are, come out in a very different light. Uh, but anyway, there were corridos about Gregorio Cortez, and it's a wonderful, really interesting book.
Oh, okay. So let's just talk about you. You're our ethnomusicologist.
Yes, I mean, I probably it's probably better to describe me as an anthropologist with an interest or a specialization in folklore studies or folkloristics. Um, and I'm in a department with a number of ethnomusicologists, and it works out very well because my some of my studies earlier on were in music, so I feel very comfortable working with music.
Oh, yeah, that's one of my, I don't know, it was or it still is my dreams to become or to study ethnomusicology. I took some classes actually in
Hmm.
California. Yeah, I took some ethnomusicology classes, and I was part of the California chapter, ethnomusicology chapter, and we had this all the college from Santa Cruz, UC Davis, and yeah, all those colleges. We did this chapter and we did this meeting, and then we all presented something. And I presented what did I present? Was it La Chilena?
Hmm.
No, Dance of the Devil sound, Danza de los Diablos, la
Mhm,
música. And so I played it with a berimbau, the Brazilian instrument,
mhm,
a
mhm.
harmonica, and it sounded just like it because that's the only way I could fit it. And then yeah, so and then I got the award for best performance. So like
Nice.
and that was my first ever win in music. I was like, I feel like wow, I'm a musician.
That's great.
Yeah,
Wow.
so that was
So
my
who did you do you remember who you studied with? I know Tony Seeger was there for a while, and uh, yeah, I'm wondering who you worked with.
her name was Miriam, the Miriam
Mhm.
Devaris. That was in Santa Rosa, California.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think I know her. Yeah.
Yes. And then so that's what I studied from. But okay, let's jump into the book because there's so so many things in here. Okay. I know you have other books, but
Mhm.
I have to be I don't stingy or just talk about this one.
Yeah, that's fine. No, I'm happy to revisit that book. I have a more recent one, which is a collection of 107 corridos, and it's
I,
more like music and text with a lot of annotation also. But this is the one where I try to theorize the corrido a little bit.
yeah, I saw that one, and I'm like, what? Where did this one come from? Yeah, but so I used to I was living in Arizona. I don't know how many years, like 15, 10 years ago,
Mhm,
when I came across this book,
mhm.
and I started reading. My wife was at the university getting her master's. I was getting my ed, and then that's when I emailed you, I believe, and I was like, hey, who are you? You know this stuff. How can you know this? So it's like it's so precise to the point where you talk about the psychological and the every little detail. I'm like, oh my god. I was so happy to read this. I was like, you cannot imagine my feeling. I had the feeling I still have it when I read it.
That's great. I love that. I'm happy that it that you found it and it was meaningful to you.
Yes, yes, and
Mhm.
like especially when I told you that I said that my great grandfather Alfonso Cruz and Los Magallones,
Yeah,
all those
yeah.
men, I'm from Huehuetan, and like I read that Huehuetan and Juchitan, was one of the first corridos, or to be,
Yeah.
wow, that's history. I'm like, I'm part of history, you know.
That's such an interesting piece that's come to us from the past about one of them says ganamos and the other one says veremos, right? So it's
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
it's pretty cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just recently some a kid or young kid. I was in my group Afroméxico. We have a group now,
Hmm.
and he's like, "Hey, you don't remember when he calls me rival?" because
Mhm.
he's from Juchitan.
I see. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, to this date, I'm like, dude, you still think like that? I'm trying to be in the place where I can't do that anymore. I'm trying to find the peace. And it's like, if you're calling me rival, to this day, I can't. You're my brother, and we have to cut that off. Because it's never gonna end. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's still going on with, like, I send you the corrido, and it's still going on with that was my yeah, my uncles. And
Mhm.
now the one that did the killing, they killed one of them.
Mhm.
And my other uncle, my dad's father, he just died of a disease. Okay?
Mhm.
But now the sons of the Lauterio Mayo, the sons, they live in the US. But you can tell psychologically they are pumped up, like, quiero vengar la muerte de mi papá. You
Good
know what I
Lord.
mean?
Good
Yeah.
Lord. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's funny, no? It's like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how do you escape that cycle? It's
Yeah.
very difficult to get out of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. If there's anything you can you speak, because I want to hear you speak.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, give me a give me a suggestion. Where should I come in on it?
Okay, where should we talk about the violence, and
Mhm.
psychologically how it affects the people, or why are we are obsessed with this type of ballad or corrido,
Mhm.
and then,
Mhm.
like you said in the book, enhances the listener to be violent. Or
Mhm.
because personally, I remember I loved corridos as a little boy. I would sit next to the cantina just to listen to the rocola play. And I people were drinking, and I was just like very mesmerized. But I didn't have that feeling of violence. It was stories to me. It was amazing stories. And then
Mhm.
growing up, I could feel it, that it would take, if you were not careful, it would take you to the violence place. You could become this hombre and imitate that, and
Mhm.
become like that. So I tried to go the other way. I said, no, I like the story and the music behind it instead.
Yeah. Well, in the book, the question I really try to address is this relationship between poetry and violence. And um, on the one hand, you it feels like they don't belong together because poetry is this nice, orderly thing that people do. They create out of words these patterns, and um, it seems like the opposite of the sort of chaotic problems that violence introduces to a community. But of course, we know from all the way back to the Iliad and the Odyssey and a lot of the great epics of the world's literature that poetry and violence are actually very, very familiar with each other. It's not an unusual combination. I feel that the ballad tradition of Mexico, the corridos of Mexico, is one of the world's great treasures in terms of heroic epic poetry,
Mm.
with a lyrical tinge to it, because unlike the epic per se, the ballads have more of a kind of romantic component to them. But in any case, I feel that the Mexican corrido offers an opportunity to look at the kinds of issues that arise in all of the great ballad and epic traditions of the world. It's a it's a laboratory, if you wish, for trying to understand how these things work. You know, what are the uh, themes that uh, persist in a ballad tradition? How do the corridistas, how do they develop and deal with those themes? The people who perform the ballads, what is their relationship to the ballad community? How do people in the community receive the ballads? Um, these are just fundamental questions that, if you go in the folklore studies, they're often talking about the Scottish ballad tradition and so forth. But these are older. You have to go back a couple centuries to really, um, find the peak of that tradition. And so a lot of those questions can really only be dealt with in a kind of a historical or archival way. But with the corrido, and especially a living ballad tradition like we find in the Costa Chica, you can go there and just see what's going on. You can find out who are the people who write the corridos, what are the topics that they choose to write about. You know, when corridos are performed, what are some of the things to look for in terms of the audience response? Which corridos are selected? I talked to a number of you know per- performers, musicians who talked about, oh no, I don't this particular corrido, I don't do this in this town. I would never sing this song in this town. I don't want to make trouble, and I don't want to have problems for myself. But really, Alejandro, to stand back a little bit, then the book, as you know, I really developed three different perspectives on this relationship between poetry and violence. And it was interesting to me. I didn't honestly, when I went down there, having worked with Americo Paredes and discovered a little bit about the ballad, the corrido on the frontera. Um, I didn't expect it would be as nuanced as it was. That these perspectives would allow for really very different ways of processing the violence that is actually the truly tends to be the focal point of the corridos. And so obviously the one that you cannot deny, and it's the first one that jumps up, is the corridos are celebrating violence, and they are, in a way, to a degree, they are, because certainly it's it would be unusual to find a corrido that would really praise somebody for doing some kind of crazy violence, but rather violence that happens in a situation where, let's say, a person is standing up for the family, or as you mentioned earlier, uh, there's been a problem, and a person feels like he has to maybe take revenge for something that happened. And that kind of violence that is motivated and seems to have the stamp of approval in a way from the ballad community, that violence is praiseworthy, as we see in the songs. But I found other things were going on, and the sort of editorial component, where apart from telling the story, the ballad maker comes in with some kind of evaluation of what's
Mm.
going on in the story. And this is where this regulating theme comes. Of course, I found it in the work of a couple of Costa Chica scholars who had already been looking at these things, and I found some ideas already expressed along these lines, and I took it because it certainly applied very well to the material that I was encountering, and that is that the corrido also specifies some kind of boundaries and limits to violence, and tries to contain it in a certain way. Um, not maybe explicitly. It doesn't preach against violence. That would be really out of character, right?
Mm.
There's a sort of tonality to the corrido, and as soon as you violate that, as soon as you go away from that, is very very obvious, right?
Mhm.
But still, in indirect ways and in subtle ways, there is an effort in many of the corridos to regulate or somehow gain uh, uh, some control over the violence. And then the third theme is this therapy in the aftermath of a violent event, and that was also evident in a number of the corridos. So I came up with a way of thinking about the relationship between poetry and violence, which allows for an interesting mix of possibilities. And sometimes all three of them are present in a single ballad, or maybe in some cases you see one of them more prevalent than the others. But I think to really get a handle on this, in terms of especially the Costa Chica corrido tradition, which at the time I was there was very much a living ballad tradition. I haven't been back there in a while now, but to get a handle on that, I think you need to explore all three of those avenues.
Mm. Okay, awesome. Now I see also the it has so much history.
Hmm.
I mean, like it could be a history of the Costa Chica book also.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking, can you talk about the mestizaje, the categories, like the moreno and the and the negro and the indio and the blanco and then afro mestizo and you call them, you say you want to call them American Indians, right? or indigenous or American indigenous in there instead of you say Afro mestizos.
Yeah, yeah.
So you went into
Mm.
So the corrido, this type of corrido is more prevalent in the Afro community.
It's a good question. I mean, surely we can say that the Costa Chica is somewhat distinctive in Mexico for having a significant African origin component in the population, right? You could say the same thing of Veracruz, maybe, and those would be the two areas that come to mind. And people don't usually think of African origin populations in Mexico. You think of Brazil, Cuba, Colombia, whatever, but it's there in Mexico, and I think it's a neglected. Unfortunately, it's not. People are getting into it now, but for a long time, it was not, given the attention that it deserves. But for the Costa Chica, you really can't avoid it because the people there themselves are, very much aware of this ethnic complexity of the region. Terminology is very much up for grabs, and there, at least when I was down there, people were talking about yo soy negro, call me negro. That's the word I like. Or someone else will say, no, 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 moreno, yo soy moreno, and so it's really interesting uh, to see that these sort of degrees of or these what would you call them, almost like pedigrees, in terms of ethnic or uh, ancestral origins, were something that people were very aware of. And one thing that I really wanted to, I worked on this quite a bit because I thought it was problematic. What I call the Africa thesis, which was very much around, and I hope it's been, I hope people have a better handle on it now. But this idea that there was this sort of innate tendency towards violence, among people with African origins. This was something that you would. It was prevalent in some of the scholarship about the Costa Chica, and it was also something that you heard people say. Even sometimes people within the community who, themselves had sort of, Afro mestizo, probably characteristics, but had absorbed some of the people I talked to had absorbed this sort of stereotype. Somos muy violentos. Well, I wanted to really debunk that because I didn't see that. I didn't think that was accurate. The and it's you've the book well enough. You've seen what I do with it. You know the there's plenty of violence to go around. In the
Everywhere.
history of Mexico or in the history of the United States or any country. Let's face it. It's a phenomenon of human society, as problematic and difficult as it is. But the thing that gave it, on the surface, you see, some of the characters, uh, that are celebrated in the corridos would be people who, came from the smaller Los Bajíos and the smaller, villages and so forth out there, who had a closer connection, and physically, maybe could be characterized as, having a strong African pedigree. If I don't think that's the right word, but anyway, it's one word that comes to mind. Um, but the thing is, those guys were brought into the action by these power plays that were going on among the sort of the people who were running things in Ometepec and Pinotepa and here and there, out of Acapulco, of course, and all the way up to Mexico City. There's a whole. It was really interesting how some of the corridos trace the conversations that go on about various situations all the way up to the El Presidente de la República, right? All the way down, through, down to the local level. So I was troubled by this. To me, you just can't attribute a trait like that to a group of people. You have to look at the contextual, the sort of socioeconomic situation, and so I wanted to deconstruct and deal with that, what I call the Africa thesis, which says that there are two versions of it really. One of them is a sort of a really kind of low level, crass idea that there's a genetic tendency towards violence, and what do you do with that? And it's hard to even take that as a serious proposition. But if you look at Aguirre Beltran, for example, his idea is that because of the cimarrones and so forth, that this to defend themselves in this precarious situation, they developed, as he calls it, un ethos agresivo, right? And
Mhm.
it's something that has to be taken, that is a sort of a cultural, or we could say even historical rationalization, but even that I think is problematic. So yeah, that's something that I spend a little time working on, because it was important to me to offer a different way of thinking about it.
Wow, nice.
Mm.
I mean, I have so much questions, but there's time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So what times were you there? What the period when you went to Costa Chica? How do you a gringo got along there? Like,
Yeah.
I could see all the pictures in the books, and then
Mhm.
you had to learn Spanish.
Yeah. Well, I think the first time, yeah, I was a graduate student at the University of Texas in Austin, and I was working with Americo Paredes, and I had a free summer. So I remember going to talk to him in his office there around probably April or so, and he said, "Well, I hear there's some corridos down in Guerrero, right?" And he said, "I hear there's some bandidos down there too." Um, I actually had more trouble with the judicial than I had with the bandidos, but
Oh,
um,
that's always yeah, that's always it.
I had some very unpleasant, difficult encounters. One judicial pulled a gun on me once, but anyway, I had a little green Volkswagen Bug. Um, I just drove down there, and it was great. I went down through Zacatecas. I made friends with some people there. Went down to Cuernavaca, but ended up in Chilpancingo at first, and really had a good time. Met a number. I was a young fellow then, probably about your age, and
Mm.
really, had I just people were very friendly, and I was enjoying it. Um, but the people in Chilpancingo said, you got to go down to the Costa Chica. That's if you really want to, get into the corridos, that's where you have to go. So I did, and the first people I met were the Arismendis. You know,
Arismendi.
you must know some of those guys.
Yes, I've heard so many of yeah. So
Yeah,
they're still yeah. A lot of that last name is still active.
yeah. They
Yeah.
were from up there around Ejido Nuevo, but they were a good entry point, because like Raul Arismendi was working in the library there in Acapulco at the time, and I met him, and and through the brothers, I started going around and meeting some of the people they know, and they put me on to Juvencio Vargas, and that was that was very significant, because Juvencio and his brother Moises had Los Hermanos Vargas had been a pretty big deal long before I got there, when they were younger fellows. But Juvencio was still very much in his prime, and singing and playing music. And he and his daughter Meche, she'd write down the words to the songs, and some of the ones they'd pick up in the villages out there. But yeah, it's just one thing kind of led to another. I kept meeting people who were very friendly. Raul Mayo out in Cruz Grande. I don't know what's become of him and his family, but they were great. And there's just, yeah, I start to name them. There's so many people that took an interest in what I was doing, and they themselves were interested, and we could kind of share this, and put me in touch with musicians, and um, you know people who I got to meet and talk to, quite a few composers of corridos and so forth. So yeah, 1972, the summer, and then I kept going back from time to time whenever I could get away. And my last visit there was what, I don't know, maybe around, I know in 1990, it seems to me in 1996 or so, I had a chance to spend a few months down there again. And I can't remember, I don't think I've been there for a good 20 years now, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, I think it's around that 99 because I read it in the book.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. What was I gonna say? I just had a question.
yeah.
Um, but for the corrido, like the history of it, we don't exactly know, right? The exact thing, but you said there it's shortened for corrido something.
Yeah, the Romance Corrido. So
Romance corrido.
Yeah, I think it's we can definitely trace the corrido in Mexico. I think back to the Spanish Romance, which is at least formally in terms of its poetic structure and so forth. I think the flavor of it also picks up from some of the indigenous narratives that are part of the, the indigenous component of Mexico. But the poetic form and so forth, like the decima, for example, these come from
Yes.
Spain. These are some of the folk poetic traditions of Spain. But the romance was a big deal in 15th and 16th century Spain, when Spain was at its strongest, at its highest point in a way. It was, the Spanish Empire extended all across the world, and yeah, we know much too much about that. But um, but in that period of it was a period of great cultural fluorescence in the Iberian Peninsula and in Spain, and the romance was everywhere. There were courtly romances that were sung at among the nobility and elite settings, but then the romance was something that would be sung out in the countryside too, and it was essentially very similar. If you go back and look at some of the romances that have been preserved from that 16th century Spain, for example. It's not that it's got some of the same qualities that we find in the corrido, and it has essentially the same poetic structure and stanzas, and with the rhyme scheme and all of that. Octosyllabic, those features that tend to be characteristic of corridos, with some variation on it as well. So anyway, right, there was a form that came up. You can find references to it here and there, called the romance corrido, and it meant a certain kind of romance that would be sung through. You wouldn't pause with any refrains or anything like that. And the theory is that, and I don't know if we can demonstrate this as fact, but it's plausible that term romance corrido, when those came over, to Mexico, they dropped the term romance, but they kept the term corrido. So that is my understanding of how
A
this.
run. So corrido, a run.
Yeah,
It's like you just sing it without stopping. You're just
you
okay,
kind of
running.
you run through it
You
essentially.
run
Yeah,
through it. Yes.
yeah,
Okay. Por eso es un corrido. That's why it's a corrido. It's a run.
yeah,
That's funny.
exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, okay. One more thing about corrido specifically. So we are there's a lot of anthropologists and and we're coming to this time and history to make it Afro Mexican or Afro mestizo. That's the corrido. Like, but like you said, it's not really Afro. It doesn't come from Africans that came to Mexico, but but the spoken words, the way they would sing it, that became Afro.
So that's always such a hard thing
Yes.
to sort out, right? Because
Mhm.
the thing is, in a country like Mexico, the populations have been mixing and interacting for hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years, and so when you try to pull out one trait and say this is African, um, it you can come up with a plausible argument. For example, the round houses that they used to have, um, in some areas just off the coast of Louis, yeah, along the coast of not Guerrero, but um, Oaxaca.
Mhm.
So these round houses, they've hypothesized, okay, this is similar to the round houses that are very, very prominent in a number of different cultures in Africa. But maybe not, who knows? I mean, there's something there because you can see it in people's faces, So yeah, for sure, Africa came to Mexico. African people, the enslaved Africans, were brought to Mexico. They played a very important role in Mexican history. In a number, Benito Juarez comes to mind as a person that, had that also, that kind of, and
Guerrero.
Vicente Guerrero. Yeah, I mean, it's so it's a thing, but to my mind now, another person could have a different approach. I think it's really difficult to pull things out and say, this is an African influence. Here's an interesting angle on it. If you think of the Chilena,
Mm.
So the Chilena, I don't think you can say that Chilena is an Afro mestizo form per se, but there's certainly a particular style that you hear in Afro mestizo communities when they do the Chilena, which is a little different from the sort of style that you encounter when the Chilena is played, let's say by a different kind of, let's say a group that's coming out of a less, not so much Afro mestizo setting. So there's some stylistic features, and
Mm.
maybe somebody who could do a very careful analysis of that could pinpoint some, I don't know if they'd be acoustic features or certain styles of speech or what have you. Um, you could probably identify those features that help us or make me think that there is a kind of an Afro mestizo flavor to the Chilena. Now, I will say this about corridos. You may know this, that the only place you hear corridos done in minor keys is the Costa Chica. Corridos are sung in many parts of Mexico, obviously very famously on the frontera, the northern frontier.
Narcocorridos.
Yeah, and now the big thing going on is the narcocorrido. But those are always 100% in major keys. And
Mm.
you're a musician, major and minor, right?
Yes.
Um, so that's really distinctive of the corrido. This makes the Costa Chica tradition unique in anywhere.
Ah.
Yeah, it's distinctive of the Costa Chica tradition. And so does that connect to an Afro mestizo influence? I don't know. Um, my idea is that the chilenas can be in major or minor keys. I think maybe some of the chilena style influenced the corrido making, and people said, hey, we can do this in minor key too. uh, but I don't know, all of this stuff is interesting to think about.
Yeah. I didn't become obsessed over the Chilena, but I did try to trace it,
Mhm.
and I found. I mean, it's called Chilena, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it came from the Chileans, I guess, that were
Mm,
traveling to California for the gold rush.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, and they would dance the cueca. It's called cueca. They would
yeah.
dance with their little pañuelos, and and then the
Mhm.
Africans or the Afro community picked it up, and they
Mhm.
call it Chilena because it came from the Chileans.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then I found out that it came from Peru. Then no, it didn't come from Peru. It's like a cousin of the samba.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
the dance could be the Afro influence.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
that's interesting. It's good that you've explored that, because that's another interesting angle on these things. Yeah, the Zambacueca, right, is a
yeah,
kind of a
yes. So
it's a
they're like cousins.
and it's there's definitely a connection there of African origin people down there in Peru and Chile. I think in Chile they have another name. I don't know, if it's the marinera. I've forgotten, but the same rhythm has a different name. And Chileans and Peruvians quarrel about this. Like, hey, we did this is ours. No, this is our dance. It's like the Uruguayos and the Argentinians trying to decide
Who's
who.
best? Soccer.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, but for sure, it does seem like that's the sort of pathway that it came up on those ships, and the ships would put in at Huatulco or in Acapulco. They'd spend a little time getting fresh water, and the sailors, people would be exchanging songs with each other, and that seems to be the pathway for it.
Yeah. And okay, one last thing.
Yeah.
Also, I found out that that's where the mango came from. We
Oh.
have in Costa Chica, we have which is our mango Manila.
Mm, mm.
But we have there the small mangoes. Mango Manila came from Manila, right? When the ships came from the China or yeah,
Oh,
so that's why we called it mango Manilas because it
yes.
came from. I know it's funny. It's amazing.
The galleon, the big ship would come and bring all that crazy stuff.
From the Philippines, from Manila.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that's why we call it Mango Manila, and that's what we call it Chilena because the Chileans they
Yeah.
didn't call it Chilena because it came from the the Chileans. So that's why we call it Chilena.
Yeah.
But yeah. But yes. So you have to go, right?
Yeah. I need to move along here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to. I am in Maine right now. I live in Maine,
Okay.
and I mean it's not that far to Indiana. So I would like hope this summer I'm traveling to California and doing something, but I would like to maybe stop. I don't know. It depends on COVID,
Yeah, I
but
know. I know.
yeah, and pick up the corrido. Like how to, because I know how to play it, but I don't know the structure. I mean, you can send me, 1 4 5 or major, minor, A B. I can, but I want to have a structure where I can tell people, okay, this is how you play it. You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
maybe we can communicate and just give me the structure of it, or because I do some music theory and I even teach some music. But
Yeah.
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 So that's I've been it's like I have it in my chest. I can't get it out. I want to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, it's good. That's fine. It'd be fun actually if we have a chance to do this to maybe play some music together. I get my guitar out and you bring I assume you play guitar and but yeah, let's if COVID allows us to do stuff like that, let's communicate. When you're ready to hit the road or before and we'll see what we can arrange. I'd enjoy that.
All right, thank you so much. I'm serious. You made my whole month. we we
Oh,
we,
that's
ta-
great.
we talked to Laura Lewis last week, so this is amazing. Good, good.
Yeah. Of
Yeah,
course, Laura and I know each other. She probably told you that, and we've corresponded and talked and shared compared notes over the years. So, is she still in England? I think last I knew
she
she was
is in New York now.
in where?
New York.
Oh, she okay. So she's back in the States.
She's back and forth, but
Uh-huh.
she does a lot of more online, like online now because of COVID.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah, yeah.
but
That's great.
I will let her know to give you a ring or email.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, let's stay in touch and don't hesitate if you have other questions or if you'd like to talk again. I'm totally cool with that.
All right, okay. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
Okay, well,
All
my
right,
pleasure. Nice talking to you.
nice talking. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, bye now.
Bye.